Alright, let's talk about profiles. So what we'll do is we'll go to our favorite place called setup, and in the quick find box we'll type pro, and you'll get profiles coming up here. We'll click on profiles and we'll see all the profiles which are available within the org for us, right? So what is a profile? So profile is basically a set of permissions combined together so that you can grant your user those accesses. So that's what profiles says. For instance, what you can do in a profile, you can define which particular object a user has access to, and you can also define the type of access. So you can say whether that is read access, read write access, or it is view all or modify all kind of access, and what all fields this particular user can see or edit within that particular object. This is the main purpose of the profile, to give a base level of access to a particular user, right? So like you saw when we created a user, you have to give him a profile, and as a thumb rule, whenever we create a profile, we try to create that profile which can cater to the maximum set of users. So for example, we have a sales team in India, we have a sales team in UK, we have a sales team in US. So then what we'll do is we'll create a profile which is consistent and which would have the baseline of access for all of these users, and then we can add on to these accesses using permission sets, right? We'll talk about permission sets in a bit, but to understand profiles, we always create a profile which can be assigned to a lot many users, and then we build upon access from there. So that's what profiles are. Let's quickly go into profiles and see what the access looks like. So let's go to system administrator profile. The user interface that you see here might not be the same in your org. So for that, what you need to do is from the quick find box, search for user, and you go to user management settings, and there you see this option called enhance profile list views. You need to enable it, and also enable enhanced profile user interface. So both of these settings, when you enable it, you would get the view which I was just showing you. So let me disable this and show you how the profiles would look like. So see, earlier this particular section was also a little different because that was the enhanced list view, and now if I click on system administrator, you see the UI here is very different to what you saw earlier, and this is not very user friendly, to be honest with you. So always go here and enable these two settings, and you go in profile. So now you see the UI is different, and let's go to the system admin profile. So this time the UI here is also different. This is an enhanced user view which you are looking at. This is much more easier, faster, and you can easily look at the settings which you want to handle. Let's play around and see what we can do here. Let's play with our student object, right? So let's go here. Let's go to the quick find box and search for our object which is student. So let's click on students here. So what you see here is basically a collection of settings which you can do for your object, and the user who would get this particular profile will get all of these accesses, and they can, let's look at what are these accesses. So first is record type. We currently have just one record type for our student object, but you can create another record type, and what you would see here is I'm just clicking edit. So what you can do here is you can assign a particular record type, and then you can also assign that particular record type as a default record. So let's understand this. So let's say this particular object has multiple record types. So let's say you have 3 record types. So then you can allow this particular profile to use either just one particular record type and make that record type as the default record type, or you can assign 2 record types and you can make one as default record type and the other one they can pick and choose. So basically, when a user has access to multiple record types, so what happens is on the user interface, when they click new on that particular object, so then they would get a pop-up to select which particular record type they want to use, and then they would get the pop-up to fill up all the fields. So that is the difference. So that's how record types work from here. Also, for each record type, which we have seen earlier, that you can define the page layout as well for each record type. And then you set up the permissions from here. So like read, create, edit, delete, view all, and modify all. So for any object, you can define which all object permissions you want to give to this particular profile. So let's say we can make an object for a particular profile as read only if we just give the read option and revoke all other options, right? Similarly, create. So you see there are 4 basic permissions: read, create, edit, and delete. These are called CRED in the shorter form, CRED. So where C refers to create, E refers to edit, R refers to read, and D refers to delete. These 4 basic permissions are called CRED. So you can define these 4 permissions here in the profiles. We were talking about create. Create and edit are 2 different permissions. Create lets you create a new record, and edit lets you edit the existing record. So for example, if a user has read and edit rights on a particular object, then they would just be able to edit the existing records and won't be able to create any new records. Similarly, then you go with delete. So delete basically refers if you are deleting a particular record. Then we have view all and modify all. So view all basically refers to that you can view all of the data, and modify all basically says that you can modify all of the data which is available within Salesforce. So modify basically means edit, and view means basically read all the data, or you can edit all the data if you have this permission enabled on your profile. Now you would be wondering why all these options are grayed out in the user interface. And the reason for that is that we are currently on system administrator profile, because as a system administrator, you need to have all of these accesses on for all of the objects available. Let's create another profile. So in order to create any profile, it's easier that you clone an existing profile. Let's clone our system administrator profile, and let's call it clone of system admin. Right, I've just given this name, but you can define any particular name that you would find it more appropriate. Let's go to students now, our object. So now if I click edit, now you see all these 6 options have become editable. So let's say I revoke read. So basically, if I revoke read, all of the other options get revoked automatically. If I do modify all, then you see all other options also come up, barring create. So basically, in order to modify all, you need the option to read, edit, and delete those records. Only then you can modify all of the data. So that's something which Salesforce handles by itself, so you don't need to worry about it. But let's give modify all and all of the access for now or on this profile, and then all the fields that you have created on this particular object. So you can define access for all of those fields as well. So what you can do is you can make all of them read only. You can revoke the access as well, and you can either make as a read only field or you can make it as editable field. So when you do an edit, you see that read is automatically checked, and if you revoke read, edit automatically goes away. Right? This is an extension which I'm using, which lets you check all of these boxes together. So if you are using this extension, then that doesn't do the inherent Salesforce action, which lets you check the read by default, but make sure you check accordingly. Right now we'll give access to like both read and edit access, but you can see like how you can modify read and access to a particular field. So let's say if we have removed access to a particular field from here, so then even if I have like a view all or a modify all access permission on this particular object, but I don't have read and edit permission on that particular field, I won't be able to see that field on the user interface on my page layout. And if a particular field is read only, so let's say if this phone number field is read only, then even if I have a view all and a modify all access, I would not be able to edit that particular field on those particular records. So this is a very important thing to remember. So what this thing does is, this is an object level permission. In order to understand this better, so let's go back to the basic concept of our object, which is the data table. So when you look at the data table and when we look at these CRED permissions, so then these permissions refer to the row level access. So you will have access to that particular row, and the field level permission is basically column. So if you don't have access to a particular column, then you cannot modify the value within that column. However, you can still access the rest of the columns within that particular row, or you can delete that whole row as well. So I hope we are clear with this, and similarly you can set up access for other objects as well. There are a few more things which you need to look at while creating profiles. So let's go to the profile overview and let's scroll through all of these options available, and we'll quickly see what all we can modify. So first thing is assigned apps. So what assigned apps refers to? So basically all of the apps that you have created within Salesforce. So you would see those apps available here, and what you can do is you can make these apps visible, and you can make one of the apps as default as well. So let's say if you want to make our sales app as the default app, we can do that, and the app which you would make default has to be visible. So that particular visibility goes grayed out, and that's something which Salesforce handles by itself. You can make certain apps invisible as well to a particular profile. Generally, when you do such things in a live environment, you keep only one or two apps available to a particular profile, and then others are not available. So if you take a live example, so in a company you would have HR team, you would have sales team, and you would have finance team. So then you create an app for HR team, you create another app for finance team, and you create another app for sales team. So then associated with that app, you would also create a profile, and then in that profile, so let's say finance profile, you only give access to the finance app and not to the sales app. So then the finance team would only be able to see all the objects and tabs which you have added to your app, and you have granted access using profiles to those objects. So that's how you can control the access. So you as a system administrator would be able to see all those apps, which is finance, sales and HR, but a finance person who has the profile as finance, they would only be able to see finance app in their UI. This is very interesting. So as an exercise, what you should do is create 3 apps, try to change the tabs there, and then create 3 profiles, make it finance, HR and sales, and then create a user, which we saw in the video before. So using the Salesforce license, create a user. You have 2 licenses within this org, so you can create another user, and then first give that user the profile as finance and log in back to Salesforce and see how the UI would change for him, and then change the profile and bring it to HR, and you would see only HR app is visible to him and he cannot see finance app. So try doing this. Then a very important setting here is Apex class. So what happens is when developers create certain Apex classes, you would have to go in the profile and grant access to those Apex classes. Otherwise, if that Apex class is invoked but my profile does not have access to that Apex class, then that functionality might not run. So it's always preferable to grant access to those Apex classes. Then you have certain custom permissions as well, and custom metadata types. So what custom permissions is, so let's say your developers have created a lightning component which you want to put on the UI. So what happens is when you create that component and you want to make it visible to only a limited set of people. So what you can do is you can create a custom permission, and then you can use this custom permission within within the lightning component code, or alternatively you can, within your lightning page, you can use this custom permission and set the field visibility only if that user has this permission, then you can grant it. So what you can do is, using custom permissions, you can assign that particular permission to a user, and then you can add on the accesses. So this is a way of limiting access. So let's say you have added a component to a page layout, let's say to home page, which is an org-wide home page available on all the apps, and then but you want to limit this particular component that it is visible to a limited set of people, then you can use this custom permission. This is very useful, and we'll see when we'll do development how we use custom permissions, custom metadata types, and custom settings. But for now, this is an example which I can give you to make you understand what custom permissions is. This is the closest we can go for now. Then we have certain system permissions. Let's click here and see what all system permissions that can be modified. There are a lot of system permissions, and these are which you can modify. So like there are a few things which are available which we can go through quickly, and then you can scroll through them. So like API enabled. So basically this particular permission says that they can access Salesforce via API. So what does API means? So API means that I can log in through another application into Salesforce. So like when we talk about data loader, that's when your particular user needs to have this API enabled permission on their profile. Otherwise they would not be able to log in using data loader, because that is a separate application, and the way two applications interact with each other is called API, right? It's called application processing interface, and it's basically a way for two applications to talk to each other. Similarly, there are a lot of further permissions which are here, which we will see through as and when we have the requirement to look at those. However, whenever you would add certain permission to your user, or you want to revoke any permission to your user, then this is where you need to come. Login hours. So this permission is very important, and this is where you can define what login hours would be for your user. And if he is logging out of these hours, then he might not be able to log in. So this is another way where you can control the logging in of the users. Then login IP ranges. So if you add an IP range here, we saw network IP settings earlier. They were to whitelist a particular IP so that the secondary authentication does not go for the user. But if you add a particular IP address here, then the user with this particular profile would only be able to log in from this particular IP address and not from any other IP address. So be very careful when you do this, otherwise the users would not be able to log in. Then we talk about service providers. So this is very important when you do an integration. Basically, if you're using an SSO, so which is called single sign-on functionality, then you would need to allow the service provider to add service provider to this particular profile so that they can log in from there. Then session settings, which we saw earlier as well. So you can control that from profile as well. So let's say if your org-wide session is 4 hours, but you can say 2 hours here, or you can minimize. So as a thumb rule, if there is a setting which is org-wide and then there is a setting which is overridden by profile, then the thumb rule says the one with the minimum would prevail. The one which is granting minimum access will prevail. That's that's our session settings, and then we move on to next, which says password policies. So within a profile, you can define a password policy. So there was a password policy which was org-wide, and there's a password policy within profile as well. So when you create certain integration users, in those scenarios, you don't want to expire the password. So So then you can modify this setting here, and then the password would not expire for that particular user. And similarly, you can change, you want to restrict, let's say, so there's a user in US where the password should expire within 60 days, and there's a user in India where password should expire in 90 days. So then you can modify that from the profiles. Also, you can change the password complexity, so what is the minimum password length, and all of that can be controlled from your profile. But remember, this is profile specific, so you can make these changes in a particular profile, and in the other profile these settings could be totally different. So that's another thing to remember. And default experience, so default experience here says that whenever you log in, where does the user go? And we don't have any experiences added to our org at the moment, but basically if you have a community created in your org, which we'll see in another series when we talk about community cloud, but when you create a community and then when the users log in, so we can define which community he would log in as default, right? So that's something you can define in profiles as well. So profiles is very vast and it has a lot of permissions to talk about. I've shared a couple of basic permissions which I used on a day-to-day basis. However, I would still request you to please go through, play around with these settings and see how it goes, and do the exercise which I have shared in the video. It would really help you. If you have any questions, you can join the QA session, which happens every Friday 3 to 4 p.m. GMT, which is 7:30 to 8:30 IST. And please drop in your comments, feedback, and any questions in the comment section, and I'll get back to you.